All right, so today I fell asleep in my car and I sweat quite a bit for the first time in a long time. And it got me thinking about how much water we should be drinking, how much salt we should be taking in, and all the factors that are a part of that. And I wanted to make a video to share my understanding about how much water we should be drinking and the minerals, the significance of iodine, etc. Of what I learned so far. So first off, not a doctor. If you want to do anything, then consult your doctor. I'm not telling you to do anything. Okay, it's cleared out of the way. This is just intended to be presented as information and anecdotal experience. The second thing is that glory to God. He gave me life where I wasn't deserving. So, with that said, I'm going to talk about water, hydration, the adrenal glands, skin, etc. We'll try and tie all this in together. So please bear with me with the recording. I know it's already a minute in, and I've barely done an introduction. But I'm just going to keep talking here. I promise that I'll get through all the points that I want to get through, and I'm just going to make this a one take. So there's a guy named F. Batmanghelidj who wrote a book, a very famous book called Your Body's Many Cries for Water. You're not sick, you're thirsty. He talks about how if you have dry mouth, then you're like way beyond dehydrated already. Like if you have dry mouth, period. That's his opinion. His recommendation for how much water we should be drinking every day is half of your body weight in ounces per day. So I'm like 150 pounds, 75 ounces a day. Now, for every 32 ounces, you add a quarter teaspoon of salt, which is about 500 milligrams of sodium. I'll talk more about that in a bit. In his book, he talks about how histamine is the root source of allergic reactions. Is when we undergo an allergic reaction, then histamine rises. And according to him, the biggest reason why histamine rises is it's basically a chemical solvent, not a solvent necessarily. It's a chemical that becomes more concentrated whenever there's not enough water in place to move the nutrients of food from one thing to the next. So like if food has to be broken down in the stomach, it takes a certain amount of water. Then it moves to the small intestine, takes more water. Then it eventually gets down to the colon, etc. And all the processes, all the chemical transactions that happen on a water base. And if you don't have enough water, then there has to be another mechanism for your body to get those chemicals to work properly. And that mechanism is to use histamine as a tool. So whenever we're dehydrated, our histamine goes through the roof, and then people get like cat allergies, basically. That was my, for a long time, for like 20 years, 23 years of my life, I had really bad cat allergies. And then whenever I mega dosed on vegetables, a lot of minerals, and I upped my water intake, took a probiotic, a couple other things, nothing crazy, and my cat allergies just like magically went away almost overnight within a couple of weeks. Okay, so half your body weight in ounces per day, quarter teaspoon of salt for every 32 ounces. That's his recommendation. Now, I'll move over to Jennifer Daniels, which is a controversial doctor. She's got a lot of interesting things to say. She brought turpentine to the limelight, and for that I'm very grateful. Also, she talks about castor oil having their uses. But her opinion on water consumption is that we should be drinking like a gallon of water a day, especially for sick people. And she doesn't think that that water being combined with meals is that big of a deal, that it doesn't necessarily dilute stomach acid, that's been like way blown out of proportion. I've listened to that advice before from her in the past, and I got to tell you that it just doesn't work out as well as abstaining from drinking water on the outskirts of meals, at least, like waiting 30 minutes before or after at the very least works much better. I did run into problems by trying to drink so much water every day. Now, here's the thing, is that if your diet has really sucked for a long time and you've been eating like TV dinners and processed foods, and you have like every kind of chemical that's just sitting around in your fat cells, and you've been dehydrated for months, and whatever other stressors are in your life, it's kind of one of those things where like if somebody is very, very overweight and they just start walking regularly, then they're going to see pretty steady progress pretty quickly just from walking, just doing a basic exercise. It's the same thing here with the internal affairs. If you bomb yourself with water, you've been so depleted of water for so long that really the solution to pollution is dilution. That actually does work for a time. The problem is that whenever we keep bombing ourselves with water, in order for that to leave through our kidneys, through our bladder, it has to attach itself to minerals, whether it's calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, etc. And then if we start peeing clear consistently throughout the day, then we're just shedding electrolytes. We're losing so many electrolytes by the fistful. So that's what brings me to the middle of the road here, which is simply that this was mentioned by a guy named Adam Bergstrom, like atom as an atomic. A lot of very interesting information from this man. But he has a very basic response on how much water we should be drinking, and it's to keep your urine within a straw color. That's it. If it's like watercolored, you're drinking too much. You get too much fluid intake. If it's dark, then you don't have enough. So just find the middle ground. Very simple. Keep it a straw color. Okay. So there's a guy named James Dinicolantonio. Pretty sure he's a doctor. And this guy wrote a book called The Salt Fix. And there was like, I don't know, there's something like 700 or 1,000 resources that he uses in this book. And like the whole thing is just about salt. It's actually amazing how many resources that he has and like just how thick the book is on salt. It's nuts. But the part of the book that I wanted to pull from was it's about right smack in the center. I don't have a page number for you. I have it on Kindle. But he talks about how much salt that we lose whenever, just for average people and for athletes as well. So, as it's written in here, we sweat out 1 to 1.5 liters per hour in moderate climates and 2 to 3 liters per hour in hot climates. So on average, you will sweat out around 1,400 milligrams of sodium per hour when exercising in moderate climates and around 2,800 milligrams of sodium per hour when exercising in hot climates. Okay, so again, a quarter teaspoon of salt is about 500 milligrams. So in accordance with that, if a person were to sweat 1 to 1.5 liters per hour exercising in a moderate climate, they would need to replenish themselves with about 3/4 of 1 teaspoon of salt after 1 hour. In a hot climate, it could go up to 3 grams. It's almost 3,000 milligrams there. So pretty staggering numbers considering that I believe the RDA is like less than 2,000 milligrams, something like that. Okay, he talks about, where did it go? He talks about a study that was done by Mao and colleagues in which 1 hour of soccer practice in temperature between 89 and 98 degrees Fahrenheit with 50% relative humidity caused players to lose, on average, about 2,000 milligrams of sodium from sweating. But there was one player who lost 6,000 milligrams of sodium in a 1 hour game. Okay, so 1 hour, almost 2,000 milligrams of sodium, and then in one case, 6,000 milligrams. Now, the second point here, besides the amount of salt that's being lost, is the amount of iodine that's being lost. James Dinicolantonio, he talks about iodine as, it's almost like a secondary kind of salt. It's just, we lose it in very appreciable amounts, and people don't talk about how much we lose per day, especially through the sweat. And so he goes on to mention that these same soccer players in this study lost 52 micrograms of iodine in their sweat, and one player lost 100 micrograms. For reference, that is That's about a quarter teaspoon of granulated kelp. Each kelp varies greatly in the amount of iodine that's in it, but as an RDA recommendation, it's between 100 to 300 micrograms of iodine per day. Dinicolantonio makes the insinuation in this writing that if you only get like 150 micrograms of iodine per day, then it greatly increases your risk of getting goiter. But before you get goiter, your thyroid function is going to go down substantially for a time before that. So it's ideal to get some more than just 150 micrograms of iodine. Of another relevance here, the average non-athletic adult excretes up to 600 milligrams of sodium and about 22 micrograms of iodine in their average daily sweat. Okay, so in accordance with the average athlete who sweats 3 to 5 liters a day, they can lose between 111 and 185 micrograms of iodine. So yeah, it comes out to almost 300 micrograms of iodine that an athlete can lose. And then the average person who doesn't sweat only loses like 30 micrograms of iodine. So yeah, I mean, if you're sitting around and you don't sweat at all, then it's a very, very big difference. There's like huge difference in the amount of sodium and iodine that a person loses. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I'll talk about my sauna experiences. So I spent like $120 on one of those, like, it looks like a camping sauna almost, like sweatsuit material, just like these like cheap like plastic bars. There's a little there's an evaporator, like a steam engine on the outside, and it just like pumps steam into the cloth. And I was able to like submerge myself entirely in it. I'm just small enough, and I've used the crap out of that thing. I haven't used it for quite some time, but there was some times where I just was beating myself up with it, and it was originally very beneficial, especially coupled with like binding protocols and whatnot. But then it got to a point where it was causing immense stress, and like I just couldn't stay in it for any length of time whatsoever. I couldn't figure out what the problem was. I kept trying to like eat fruits. I kept trying to eat vegetables. I was like mega dosing on salt. I didn't have too much calcium in the diet, but I was just trying all these things to try and like fix whatever the depletion was that I was suffering from, because it went from like being very pleasurable to sit and sweat profusely for like 20 minutes to like unbearable to even sit in for like 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, there was like a complete reversal on what happened. And since then, I'm a lot more stable, and I can sweat fine now. It's still not pleasurable like it once was. Like, I guess I just had a lot of garbage that I was kicking out. But I believe that it was from adrenal fatigue. And Adam Bergstrom, again, he talks about how the hub of the adrenals is actually in the skin. That's something that is not taught in conventional medical literature. But it makes sense to me, because we have, essentially, it makes sense for this reason, that if we sweat a lot and we put a high demand on our skin, then it taxes the adrenal glands. Now, to try and tie this together, the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, and Robert Morse talks about how the kidneys will filter all of the water-soluble toxins out of the body. And if the kidneys aren't working, then all of the extra stuff that hasn't been filtered will default to the skin. So he calls the skin the third kidney. Well, the adrenal glands, again, they sit on top of the kidneys. So according to Robert Morse, the adrenal glands more or less regulate the activity of the kidneys. They're kind of like the governing system. They do much more than that, just that. But it's their significance that they regulate the kidneys. So if everything internally is flowing very well, then our kidneys are going to be filtering properly and kicking out toxins as they need. But if they ever get overloaded, then it comes out of the skin, and then as a result of that, the adrenals get taxed very heavily. And 95% of our vitamin C is stored in our adrenal glands, and 5% is in the brain. The adrenal glands also need sodium in particular so that the hormone aldosterone will be put down. Basically, if you don't have enough sodium in your body, aldosterone goes up so that it can maintain what little sodium is circulating in the body, as it were, so that you don't, it just desperately is trying to hang on to what you got. But if we take salt or sodium, salt is sodium chloride, and then sodium as an isolate is sodium. But if we have sodium in our diet, then aldosterone will come down. And aldosterone is considered a stress hormone, at least in the Ray-Peat community. It's something that we don't want to have elevated if at all possible. So excessive sauna sweating, I believe, fatigues the adrenals, and then that can be fixed by having calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and vitamin C, very importantly, in the diet. Something else that Adam Bergstrom talks about is getting a sunburn is actually an adrenaline response, or it's a response of the adrenals. That if your adrenal glands were not working properly, then you would get fried by the sun. I mean, we would just basically die immediately. So if you're, long story short, the connection that I make there is that if my adrenal glands are down, then it greatly increases the chance that I'm going to get sunburned. Now, what I've correlated is that if I eat a lot of vegetables in my diet, then I don't get sunburned as badly. And likewise, if I don't eat as much polyunsaturated fatty acid, or PUFA, which is basically omega-3 and omega-6 acids, omega-9 is not found very often. Your body can make omega-9 endogenously. But yeah, if I eat a lot of omega-3 and omega-6, then it increases the chance that I get sunburn. I don't know. That's just how it's gone over life. Realize that if I eat processed food that's been cooked with like canola oil or sunflower oil or peanut oil or something, then for that time my skin is much more sensitive. Okay, continuing on here. Sweating too much without bathing or exfoliating will give a person a skin ring, which is the lymphatic stagnation of the skin indicated in the eyes. So in the science of iridology, where you take a picture of somebody's eye very clearly and you look at all the different parts of the eye, you can see like if someone has the onset of a neurological decline, you can see if they have particular organ weaknesses, of course, if they have, oh man, I'm really blanking out right now. Iridology can basically reveal every internal weakness of a person if it's appropriately looked at. You can look into Bernard Jensen, and there are some very simple guides that show like this is for your left eye, or diagrams rather, for the left eye, for the right eye. You can take a picture of your own eye, and you can see what happens. Well, one of the things is called a skin ring, and essentially, if the body has a slowed lymphatic system, which Robert Morse talks about this, the only two fluids that access all of the cells in the body are the blood and the lymph. The blood will deliver nutrients, and then when that nutrients gets used up, the waste product becomes lymph or lymph fluid, which is a part of the lymphatic system. And the skin excretes the greatest amount of toxins or lymphatic material, as it were. So whenever, if we start to get a congestion, a total body systemic congestion of the lymphatic system, then it will manifest itself in the skin, and then that reflects itself in a picture of the eyes as something called the skin ring, which is all the way around the outskirt of the eye. It's a it's a dark black ring that starts to occur. And then as that ring gets closer towards the pupil, then more and more of the eye will become dark and blackened. And yeah, I believe if you look at the diagram, it goes from the skin, and then the next ring in is the internal organs such as the kidneys and the lungs, I believe, like primary eliminative organs. Those, if they start to become congested, then the eye will become darker. But if there's localized lymphatic problems, then there are dark spots that are local to different regions of the eye. Where the eye would normally have color, it turns black and it kind of looks like a lesion in the eye with a fine microscope, a fine picture. Okay, so one thing that we can do to correct that is to dry brush. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a very brittle bristle of a brush, kind of like a horse brush almost. And what you can do is you can take one of these guys, and I have one in the other room actually. It's basically just a really brittle brush. You can look them up, and you can use it to scrape off your skin. It's mildly uncomfortable, but after you do it for 2 or 3 days in a row, you'll notice that there's a big difference in. It's almost like it's like your skin can breathe again. It's the strangest phenomenon. It only takes about 5 minutes a day to do it, and yeah, I would recommend anybody spend like 10 or 15 bucks on one of these things. The dry brushing, it's always encouraged that you dry brush towards the lymph nodes. Like you have a major section of lymph nodes here. There's a major section here around the ears. There's one around the pelvis, and there's one underneath the underarms. And I believe there might be one in the near the belly button as well, but I'm not sure on that. So the generalized rule of thumb is that anywhere that you're dry brushing, then always brush it towards the heart as a centralized theme. And that's a way of actually course correcting lymphatic stagnation of the eye, strangely enough. Okay, so if we drink too much water, then we also cause a carbohydrate depletion. This is something that I heard Greg Doucette mention recently. He's a longtime bodybuilder. He did powerlifting stuff, and he talks about how he's done like 52 or 60 shows or something crazy, bodybuilding shows where he depletes all the carbohydrates out of his body so that you can just see like the grainy, thin muscle texture. And he talks about how one of the most miserable parts of the prep leading up to the show is pounding a bunch of water, just like relentlessly drinking water to the point where you're just peeing every hour, every 30 minutes or something. He said that like it's miserable to have to wake up so frequently during the night in order to keep peeing, but it's a means of depleting carbohydrates. So that leads me into the next point, which is that in order to achieve rehydration of the body, it includes carbohydrates that are bonded in this process. So if you look up military grade rehydration packets, you'll find that they have sodium, potassium, chloride, zinc, and glucose. They also have the glucose in there, the carbohydrate. And also magnesium are in those as well. So it's a combination of all of those minerals together, but also a sugar, because without the sugar it doesn't work. That's a proper rehydration. So if we drink a bunch of water, we end up depleting ourselves of carbohydrates. At least bodybuilders know that they deplete carbohydrate around the muscle. I mean, I can't really speak to anything else about that, but I do think it's interesting that if we pound a bunch of water, we lose not only carbohydrates, but we lose electrolytes. So basically vegetables have a bunch of minerals. That would be a great way of aiding rehydration. Bone broth is particularly high in minerals. I don't know which minerals. I can just speak from personal anecdote that it's pretty refreshing after sweating a lot to drink bone broth. I mean, you could try it for yourself. Um, Fruits are high in potassium typically, but um, they're not necessarily great for uh, rehydration as a strict source. I don't think if they're combined with other minerals, I think they're great though. And then the vitamin C also plays a critical role. Not necessarily ascorbic acid. I don't condone the use of ascorbic acid, but whole food vitamin C, by the way that it repairs the adrenal glands and it helps them to stabilize, I think that plays an absolutely critical role in regulating all of the other processes of hydration. I mean, if your adrenals are in the dumpster, then your body just has an almost impossible time getting on top of stress. It's like everything becomes inflammatory to one degree or another. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I can say about rehydration and drinking water. Just drink enough water that you have a straw-colored urine. Stay up to date on your minerals. Take some vitamin C. I mean, every day you'll find that there's a benefit. If you have adrenal fatigue, James Wilson in his book titled Adrenal Fatigue talks about, I believe most of his patients take around 2 grams of vitamin C, which translates to 4 teaspoons of acerola cherry powder or kemu kemu powder. But he did mention that he had one patient that went up to 20 grams. And yeah, I heard somebody mention recently that the old school bodybuilder Vince Gironda took 500 milligrams of vitamin C every day. I don't know. That seems like a proper maintenance dose to me, provided that you're not doing anything too intensely stressful or like trying to bake yourself for like an hour in the sauna every day or something. Yeah, okay. I'll wrap it up there. Thanks for listening, guys.